Welcome everyone to my presentation. My name is Dr. Catherine Quinlan, and my goal in this webinar is to provide you with a sneak peek into some of my work related to my NSF-funded research on the lived experiences and narratives of African Americans in the STEM curriculum. So I want to begin today by really taking a poll to see who's with us. So as you do that, I want to thank those of you who attended my last webinar, my last presentation. I gave an introduction as to why I was looking at Gullah Geechee African Americans in the southern United States. And in this presentation, I'm going to merge some of my current work with a prior curriculum work I did and on cultural representation. This time I actually invited parents. I wasn't able to reach as many parents, but in addition to teachers, I did that because I wrote a book this summer, and that could be used also in the informal setting as well as the formal classroom setting. So by formal setting, I'm referring to the classroom environment, which is usually the official conventional way of learning, whether it's online now or a physical classroom where you have a designated teacher. And by informal, I'm thinking of other places outside of the classroom where uh, students also learn a great deal and spend a great deal of their time, whether at home, church, museums, and other settings in society. And these other settings, as you know, are usually more relaxed. So, and of course, right now that is blurred with COVID. I'm going to end this and see who we have. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about cultural inclusion and representation in formal and informal settings. And then this will be followed by Dr. Dawn Dow's presentation on the deadly challenges of raising African American boys, Black mothers navigating the controlling image of the thug. And I had the pleasure of seeing Dr. Dawn Dow present, so you're in for a treat. And Dr. Dawn Dow is author of Black Mothering, so you'll hear more about that. And then later on, we'll have a parent panel with Ms. Jacqueline Randall, who is Senior Enterprise Architect and IT Strategist. Okay, so some of you have been fortunate to grow up in environments and read books and attend schools and go places, whether museums or camp, that reflect your cultural norms, backgrounds, upbringing. Others, especially African Americans and Blacks, have spent a great deal of time in our formal education, learning about other people's culture, norms, interests, and the likes from other people's perspectives, never really seeing ourselves in our everyday lives played out in everyday books that we read and in other places, such as museum. So the goal of my NSF research is really to create STEM curriculum and products that is culturally representative of Black heritage, and more specifically, African Americans. So my research continues to show me how important the role of everyday narratives, conversations, and lived experiences are in shaping who we are, who we think we are, and who we become. So this is true no matter what race you are. The issue is that often our quote-unquote prescribed place or position, quote-unquote, of Blacks in our society, often perceived as inferior, causes, or I should say requires us to be additionally reflective of this reality so that we benefit more from being aware, where others might benefit more from not being as aware and just continue living. So today in my presentation, I'm going to introduce my book that I felt compelled to write this summer, Keystone Passage, and the first book, To Africa and Back. And this will be followed by introduction to my curriculum that I created a couple of years ago, African Rock Art Image Analysis. Maybe 2 years ago, I started this, and give you some exemplary examples for cultural inclusion from my work and give you some insights into science education. So my rationale and support for my work can be found in my own interpretation of King and Swartz's book titled Heritage, Knowledge, in the Curriculum. And King and Schwartz described the culturally informed principles that connect Afrocentric theoretical concepts and emancipatory pedagogies. And I'll just read off this. Indigenous voice, they say, refers to the portrayals of all cultures and groups through the experiences of their members and historical events through the voices and actions of those who are present. Indigenous voice asserts that when a culture and group speaks, for name and define themselves, their textual presence mirrors their agency in life. And this is connected to their emancipatory pedagogies, which is question driven pedagogy. And that refers to teachers asking students thought provoking questions that build on and expand on what they know. In this, students experience Indigenous voice through the instruction when teaching and learning is a reciprocal and collective experience based on inquiry. So by giving students opportunity to use their voice, they demonstrate agency by defining themselves and their ideas through instructions. Unfortunately, however, the experiences of Blacks predominantly have been different from this. Boykin and Aguera, Boykin is here at Howard University, indicated Black students are more likely to be left out and to work in isolation in schools compared with white students, who are most often given opportunities to work in groups. So it's often perceived that Black students might be distracted. So we can ask, which comes first? The chicken or the egg concept. Are they eager to speak because they're more likely to be required to work alone and silently as evidence of their commitment to learning? When you think about how your principal, for example, might measure your effectiveness as a teacher in a Black classroom, it might be as a quiet classroom is a good one, right? On the other hand, if we walk through a white classroom, we might see more collaborative work. And perhaps this explains what's observed in students' appreciation for individual and independent work. Warren, Ballinger, and Oganowski and Roseberry, their study in fifth grade Haitian and Latino minority students found that students who are given the opportunity to engage in sense making in their everyday language, they engage in asking questions, debating, creating explanations, and all. And they've noted that when classroom discourse is limited to responses or correctness from the teacher, the sense-making resources of children from diverse communities are rarely seen and valued in the size classroom. So the outcome is that for underrepresented diverse students, their sense of themselves as learners and thinkers may consequently be diminished. And Dr. Leon Walls, who's a science education research, he found in his 116 research studies that he reviewed on the nature of science, the narratives reflected white narratives. And it's important to note that I mention this because nature of science usually gives students an opportunity to engage in scientific practices and develop agency so that they can come to an understanding about how science works. So all of this informs my approach to curriculum representation and curriculum development for culturally representing Blacks and African Americans in general, looking for pedagogy that empowers and encourages students to discover their voice. A while back, I created the African rock art image analysis, and I wanted to show why I came full circle here back to this curriculum and continue to work on it. And this connects to my book that I recently wrote this summer. I felt compelled to write this book for several reasons. When we think about the reality of our classroom and testing and how likely this culturally representative STEM curriculum is to be implemented, I couldn't help thinking about literacy in writing because having been a classroom teacher myself for 16 years, these are ideals, but they're ideals and they're realities. And so I was driven to write this as also reading with my son during bedtime and finding out through the years of reading, and especially now that he's older in chapter book series, the narratives change a little bit. and I get to see how the chapter books he reads leads him to internalize and appreciates one culture over the other. So, just to tell you a little bit about this book, I this is titled To African Back, and it's the first book of this series. Here you have Cliff, Monty, Chandra, and Keisha's summer visit to Grandma turned out to be more interesting than they had anticipated, and an unexpected find transports them to ancient and modern Africa where they meet indigenous Africans and they make new friends. However, they must find their way back, and they use the knowledge of science, history, and wits to find their way back to Grandma. And this was really important too because my son loves adventurous books, but I couldn't find these kind of adventurous books that were representative of African Americans so that he could embrace some of the everyday, um, not everyday marriage, everyday ways of being that I read about. So, what does this all mean for science and for STEM? In an effort to include the African heritage and at the same time to provide students with an opportunity to develop agency and use their voice, I developed this African rock art image analysis around 2018 and published this article. So, the African rock art I refer to really is an expression and communication from Black African cultures that have existed for thousands of years. And scientists have used African rock art images as data and evidence to learn about science and cultures behind African rock art. And there's a lot of debate about methods surrounding African rock art and dating African rock art in terms of which methods are best, whose interpretations count, and whose lenses are most appropriate. So I'm just going to give you a quick outline of the article. And in this article, I talk about the Khoisan and an intersection between science, scientific research, intellectual property, law, government. The Khoisan are a very well studied group and often exploited by scientists that venture into their homes uninvited. And so they were so exploited that a code of ethics emerged. And you can also look at a YouTube video that I shared. And this article, I also talk about the Hoodia gardoni, which is an indigenous plant that the Khoisan often use to go hunting as an appetite suppressant, and our um, pharmaceutical companies here used or to as a dietary measures here. So there's just a lot of in my curricula connections. My goal is to connect this with, and also the physiology of dance. I talk about that in my article, so I'm not going to go into it as much depth, but you can learn about that science behind it. So students can use African rock art as an engaging context to explore various aspects of science, art, and culture. And really, this is an interdisciplinary lesson that's supported by the next generation science standards, the social studies curriculum, and the Common Core in language arts. And if you look at the NGSS appendix on understanding the nature of science, it begins to address ideas related to inclusion. If you look at the category and understandings about the nature of science, it says science is a human endeavor. People have practiced science for a long time, and individuals from many nations have contributed to science. The problem is, however, that the STEM curriculum excludes the narratives of Black culture and heritage, and moreover, a lot of times, classroom practices just use mainly story synopses as a tag on to the main science lesson. So, in this particular lesson, the narratives begin and end with African heritage and looking at that students can learn from. So, here's an example, and what can you tell from a picture? And the significance of this actually in using African rock art images as data and is that even NASA scientists use images and pictures from the moon, satellite data, places that you really can't venture on. And when they're on the moon, they took pictures using Nikon cameras, right? And satellite images from such as the images that they use in a Mars student imaging project from Arizona State University. And those are all the reasons I thought about using African rock art as data So the students get to explore scientific practices as well as learn about their African heritage. So in this engage, you can ask, what can you tell from this picture? There are students who've made several observations. If you look at the one on the left, uh, some students have mentioned that this is might have responses such as, oh, it looks like a family. So it becomes a really nice opportunity to talk about the difference between observation and an inference, because sometimes students give their inferences as observations, and you can prompt them for further questions. And one of the things I've done is to even distribute this during using laminates, and this can actually be used during while online teaching, especially. I do have PowerPoints. I will share these resources in a moment, like you can use in the classroom and use in the online environment for many of you who are in there. Right, you can ask questions, and the nice thing about this is this becomes interesting for both teachers and students who are unfamiliar with the subject, so you can learn alongside students. And the other thing they can learn about is to distinguish between pictographs and petroglyphs. So the earlier images are pictographs, and here are some petroglyphs and features that are these are features that are carved into the environment, and then you have petroglyphs, which are sometimes features that are carved in by manually by not by nature. So one of the interesting things, one of the questions that students like to ask when they're exploring these images is, how do they create the paint? How do they find and create the paint for African rock art images? And so in this one particular explore, what students ended up doing was they attempted to replicate the paint using similar resources from the environment. And it's really important to explain to students that there are three main ingredients that you need. You need a something that serves as a color, you need something that serves as a binder, and then you need something as a liquid. And so we had a lot of fun just really explaining, exploring different ingredients from the environment. So this gives you if you look at color, where does it come from? Well, they use things like ochre, which is like a form of iron oxide from the environment, charcoal to get the black color, and you can use as your binder. Sometimes they use plant saps, and as you can see from the last email, they use sometimes a lot of different kinds of fluids. But in our environment, we can ask, well, what do we use now? And so we explored this and had fun with this, and we used things from the environment. The equivalent of our plant sap, we looked at things like chocolate syrup. You can give it color, or if you wanted to go as far and use honey, you're welcome to. Petroleum jelly, and then I'm sorry, but those we use as binders. And then if you look at the bottom right, you have things like charcoal for color, sand, chalk. Because calcium carbonate was also found in some of these dating of some of these rock art images. And so this is something you can do online now. You can ask students to grab what they would use as a binder. You can ask them to grab, if they have anything in their cupboard, they might use as a for color, and create their own painting in the end. And here's my son. We kind of pretended we were in a he was in a cave, and this, I have to say, this was not my original idea. I did get this idea from someone. We pretended it was an original cave painting, and so there's so many variables that you can have fun with. If you're doing this online, you could ask students, maybe grab a cereal box, and they can cut up open it up and pretend you have rough material, like as you're in a cave like environment. The nice thing about this is that this activity gives teachers an opportunity to highlight many different things related to science, physical properties, physical changes, and you can use this as an opportunity to distinguish it from chemical changes and mixtures, distinguishing between homogeneous, heterogeneous mixtures, exploring colors, and so there are a lot of opportunities if you look at biology related concepts, the environment. I'm working currently on some biology related concepts and data, and linking it to earth science and minerals, as well as the scientific practices. What did you observe? And different kinds of dating, whether it's, which one is better. That's always a constant debate. Is absolute dating or relative dating better for dating rock art? And so there's a lot of arguments to that. And then you can look at sociocultural aspects. And I do use this as well in my pre-service training. It allows students to explore cultural representation. So just to give you a quick, what I want to do is just quickly show you some of my resources and where you can find handouts on the website and how you can use it. And okay. So if you go to African Rock Art Image Analysis, so there's also a teaching guide, and there's a video I also created. I forgot to show you that you can go through and ask you what questions you can ask students. So it's all laid out there, whatever definitions are there, telling you where you can pause that video clip that I created. That was my first video clip attempt. and and then you have the PowerPoints. Here's a list of images you have that you can use, and you have the sources. This is the source of the image. The nice thing about these images is that you actually have descriptions, scientist descriptions about where these images are located, things that they can look at and research. So these are all available to you, and you can download it. And then you also have the PowerPoint that you can also download and use, and you can ask students. You can use this online, so it's all created there for you. And also, I created some handouts that you can download where students can write their observations. I'm pretty sure I have different forms of these handouts for older versus younger, but this can be used in different grades. It'll be more sophisticated with older students. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up and then give you a chance for questions. So next thing I come on to, so again, I link this. I brought this back here because I talked about African rock art image analysis that allows students really to learn about this in an informal setting, and you can have discussions with students and younger kids to do that. Okay. So again, I probably don't need to sell this too much to you as far as why cultural representation is important, but there are a couple of things to think about. And this brings me back to another study done by Dr. Leon Walls, where he looked at 24 third grade African American students who, when they drew themselves, a large percentage they drew themselves in general rather than drawing scientists when they were asked, you know, who a scientist would look like. And then they confirmed a large percentage that, the scientists were Black or brown or simply their own. And according to Dr. Leon Walls, it's clear that this reflected a view that students saw themselves as scientists. However, when were asked to identify a scientist, their identification was stereotyped in gender, even though, and he did indicate that he didn't show them these stereotyped pictures. So it's really important to look at the role for modeling. Another reason is that there was another study by a researcher, Wong, who looked at British minority students, and he found that many of them felt as if they were venturing into uncharted territory, and their view of being a scientist was very racial and gendered. And so modeling is really important. And when I just want to define the concept of a model, it's a standard suitable or worthy of imitation, a representation that used as a guidance for Black students, and really a pattern for imitation. These are all dictionary definitions, a system or thing to imitate or follow. And a lot of the importance of modeling is brought out in Bandura's research, because modeling can take many forms. They can come from your community, your social interactions, they can be symbolic. And Bandura's research shows that being able to see people similar to oneself perform a task can raise self efficacy. Being able to visualize yourself in the same position, whether it's solving the same problem or applying a strategy, can build our self concept. So the thinking is, if others like me can do it, so can I. But however, alternatively, our thinking can be that if they can't do it, maybe we couldn't. Of course, this impact really will differ depending on, whether the role of the model, whether a person is close to you or whether they're purely symbolic. And however, Bandura's research showed the greater similarity, the greater the impact. And the same is true if the model experiences a challenge and is unable to rise from it. The impact could work against children. And so vicarious experiences become important when because children tend to have little or no prior experience in judging themselves and influencing the amount of uncertainty about their capability. And lastly, modeling conveys effective coping strategies that can boost self-efficacy of individuals, or self-efficacy meaning their feelings about their own inabilities, and help them to feel assured. I just wanted to highlight my more recent publication in expanding the science capital in K-12 science textbook. And so this work is really seminal to my work in the NSF project. And really, I did this before it began. And this, I just wanted to highlight and for those of you who did not attend the last webinar, if you go to the website and select videos, you will see these video clips that I created. These are video tips that are on the African American Gullah Geechee, as well as I added since then you can look for this part that says sugar. And so I'm going to stop here and address questions and see if there are any questions for me. And feel free to post in the chat any questions you have. So somebody asked, science, how the nature of science originates from Africa is somewhat preserved in the methods used. Okay. Yes. Absolutely. And that's where the Gullah Geechee African Americans come in. So yes, part of the biodiversity component that I'm working on right now relates to the Gullah Geechee African Americans and West Africa when it comes to food. Um, it's taken me a little while. I've spent the last couple months gathering sources of data because I really want students to be able to use this as an exploration, as an inquiry, rather than simply reading large chunks of information. So I've actually been collecting some information so that they can pursue mathematical explorations as well. So that's in the works, as well as I'm actually working on an animation that I was hoping to be done in time for this, which is why I scheduled this 2 months later. But I think it will take another month or so for that animation to be done. That was what I was hoping to introduce today. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. I see. Next question. How we incorporate into an after-school program. Okay. Okay. So the South Carolina portion, absolutely. Any portion at all. Now, when you said South Carolina, are you indicating South Carolina specifically because you interact with predominantly Black students? I'm just curious. One of the things I also want to point out, and the nice thing about looking at African rock art is, Africans have created African rock art, and so have Native Indians. And so the nice thing about this is no matter who the students are, they get to explore and I've done this on very, very mixed classes. I should say predominantly white classes, as well as Black classes. And it's worked out really well. Students get really excited about learning about the African rock art. Of course, depending on the age of the student, it determines what type of question we explore. And I like really exploring the more hands-on portion with little kids. With other students, the nice thing is one of the website sources for the articles, which I have on my website, have articles that are fairly simple from National Geographic that they can read about and learn about different cultures. And for the South Carolina Gullah Geechee, if you look on my website with the videos, if we have time close to the end, then I'll bring that up again. Because those videos were taken in South Carolina and the Gullah Geechee Islands off the coast of South Carolina. and in certain parts of Georgia. So it was absolutely relevant. What are perspectives of non-Black teachers and educations on adopting this type of curriculum and prioritizing? Okay, so from so far, I've had, as a matter of fact, the classes I've implemented this in, let's see, have been Black and non-Black, and usually teachers embrace it. They're very excited about looking at African rock art data. I do have to say I haven't tested it on a lot of schools yet. As a matter of fact, I haven't done as much of the school testing as I've done professional development and conferences. And those who attend it welcome it. And I think what ends up happening is a lot of times people who welcome it are those who attend to hear. And because of the nature of the exploration, they're more open to it than probably some of the other things that I've created. I'd say they're most open to this because it's very, I guess to just say it bluntly, it's just very non-threatening. And allows them to just carry out an inquiry and have fun, and they can do art and they can explore dating, you know, just dating in general. So this is perfect. You know, it's interesting you mentioned that at-risk areas. I love doing these explorations with all students, no matter who they are, because they, they have so much to say. And I've done these type of explorations with students that people wouldn't really expect to produce amazing work and presentations. And they do. And the reason they do is because they begin from an area of interest, from a question of interest. And I am about to wrap up, but I want to quickly just share one quick thing to just show you uh, as I think especially my recent work will be relevant for you in South Carolina, especially when it comes to, you talked about mental health. I think maybe you can email me and I'm happy to send you the last presentation so that you can see what this is about. This particular one on the making of sugar and food adaptations, I developed, I started. This is all in the starting phase. If you go to Sugar and Sugarcane, I shared the PowerPoints that I use in those presentation, and there's some math oriented to this, and then the sugar can. And these can you use online. Actually, it's so big you have to download it. These can be used online because I have video clips that I created, and even though they're a little uh, underdeveloped, you can still use them for now. I mean, I'm going to keep reshaping this video. Okay, thank you. Good question. I think it depends on the school. The push is very specific. It's very based on individual interest. Even though schools tend to be pushing this, it doesn't necessarily mean it's meaningfully implemented, which is why I'm doing this work. So I want to thank you very much. I'd like to stop here so we can go on to our next speaker.